What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? 8 non-tendered free agents the D-backs should target, and some free agents the D-backs should avoid this offseason.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we're going to discuss some non-tendered free agents the D-backs should target, and some free agents the D-backs should avoid altogether this offseason. So a big free agency pod coming to you guys today. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss some non-tendered free agents that the D-backs should consider going after this offseason, because the non-tendered guys are always dudes who can be intriguing. Maybe guys who are coming off injury that have a little intrigue. Maybe it's guys who are coming off a disappointing season but have been good in the past. Maybe it's guys who have been disappointing their whole career, but they were once highly touted prospects who have just never lived up to the potential. Like, that is kind of the bucket where a lot of these non-tendered guys, like, it's hard to find guys coming off stellar seasons that were non-tendered. Usually it's guys who are coming off maybe seasons below their expectations, or maybe they've never lived up to expectations, and so now they are being non-tendered. But that doesn't mean these guys can't help a team, help a new franchise once they get picked up this offseason, because some of these guys still are quality players and do have an upside to them. And there is a world where if these guys hit, they can be a very, very good Major League Baseball player. And so let's go through some of these non-tender guys I think the D-backs should consider this offseason. The first guy I want to discuss is a guy that I think I probably did a little podcast topic on last year as a potential trade candidate. Kyle Finnegan of the Washington Nationals, a guy who has been the closer with the Nationals for like the last couple years, coming off a 38 save season. So he had a monster year. But the thing with Kyle Finnegan, the reason why he got non-tender, despite having a career 3.56 ERA every single season the last few years, sub-4 ERA, he's got like close to, what is that? Like close to 6, whatever 28 plus 38 is. I'm not doing that math off the top of my head, but whatever that sum is over the last couple years, that's his save total. So this is a guy who has been pretty effective. He hasn't been great. There are definitely flaws in his game. Probably too many walks allowed, too many hits allowed. Maybe you would like a slightly higher strikeout rate, but he's still a decent, solid pitcher. And Finnegan, the reason he got non-tendered really is because he was a guy who was a tale of two halves. When looking at the numbers for Finnegan last year, he was elite in the first half of the season. That's when we were doing podcasts on Locked on Diamondbacks talking about should the D-backs trade for Finnegan as a potential closing option. Because in the first half last year, he had 25 saves, he had a 2.45 ERA and 40 innings pitched, a 101.7 whip, like almost double-digit strikeouts per 9, a sub-200 average allowed. Like, he was elite in the first half last year. But in the second half, he struggled. A 5.7 ERA, a 3.37 average allowed, an 8.94 OPS allowed. He sucked in the second half of the season, and that's why he is a free agent right now. But I still think he's a guy that could be pretty interesting. Still a guy that averaged 97 miles per hour on his fastball the last couple years. We've talked about how we want more high-velocity arms in the building. Kyle Finnegan can fit that model. Next up is a guy, this is one of those intriguing, I think he's way more intriguing than Kyle Finnegan, because If this guy hits in the perfect scenario, the perfect world, if this guy hits, he can be an elite reliever. The issue is what we saw this past season, more indicative of his future. Jordan Romano, All-Star 2022, 2023. Prior to 2024, he had a 2.9 ERA, a 2.1 ERA, a 2.14 ERA, and a 1.2 ERA. Like those were his last 4 seasons prior to 2024, where he was elite, double-digit strikeouts per nine every single season, was not giving up home runs. Walks were an issue, but this was one of the premier reliever closers in Major League Baseball. In 2024, I don't know what happened, but he really struggled to start the year, and then he got hurt and missed the rest of the season. And so for Jordan Romano, the question is, how is his health entering 2025 in? Can he bounce back to the guy that we saw the previous few seasons, right? Is what we saw this past year fluky, or is it indicative of the guy we're going to get down the line? Because if you can get 90% of the player you saw from 2021 to 2023, that is one of the best relievers in baseball. But if you get more of the guy we saw this past season, that could be a disaster for a team. But I think Romano is definitely someone that is worth taking the gamble on, because you don't see too many of these guys who do have the ceiling of being one of the best relievers in baseball. Also, a guy that averages 96 miles per hour on his fastball. I would be interested on taking the gamble of Jordan Romano. Next up, how about a little Hunter Stratton? Some of these guys I actually were a little unfamiliar with before doing this exercise, but Hunter Stratton, after looking at the numbers, I really didn't know who he was, but the numbers were kind of encouraging, and it made me wonder why a team like the Pittsburgh Pirates would release a guy like Hunter Stratton, who is coming off a decent season with Pittsburgh. His rookie year in 2023, small sample size, 2.25 ERA, 12 innings pitch. This past year, 37 innings pitch, a 3.58 ERA, and was just like solid. Maybe he's not as good as what that ERA indicates, because he's not really like a strikeout machine or anything like that. When you look at the K rate numbers for Stratton, he's barely like above 20%. Like he's right around 20%, like 21% for his career. But he's a guy who doesn't give up home runs. He's a guy with a career 5% walk rate. The hard contact stats allowed this past season were pretty good. So it's like, I look at all the numbers and I'm like, I feel like they tell you he's a pretty solid pitcher. Averages around 95 to 96 on his fastball, throws decently hard. Like the fastball was pretty effective last year. I don't know really why the Pirates decided to get rid of Hunter Stratton, because the numbers tell you like he's kind of decent, and maybe this is a guy that should have stayed around. I mean, he did miss the rest of the season due to injury with a ruptured patellar tendon when you're trying to cover home plate. So maybe there's questions and concern about his health going to next year. But if you're the Pittsburgh Pirates, I don't understand just getting rid of a guy like Hunter Stratton. So I think that's someone that I would be interested in if I'm the Arizona Diamondbacks. Then the last guy I want to discuss, Jacob Webb from the Baltimore Orioles, also coming off a pretty decent season where the Orioles said, you know what, we would rather go in another direction. 3.02 ERA and 56 innings pitched this past year. The strikeout number is like not too bad for Jacob Webb either. Like, is he an elite strikeout artist? No, but he was around 24, 25% this past year. Walk rate is a little high, double-digit walk rate, but the hard contact stats allowed are pretty good. Jacob Webb, you look at his pitching profile, he's a guy, four-seamer, would like him to throw it a little bit harder, 93.5 miles per hour this year. But the thing with Jacob Webb, when you look at his year-by-year fastball velocity, like every other year he's throwing 95, and then in those subsequent years he's throwing like 93. So it's like next year is he going to be back up to 95? I'm not sure about that, but this is a guy whose fastball velocity does fluctuate, it seems like, year to year. So maybe next year could be a season where Jacob Webb's velocity is a little bit better than expected. So I think it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to take a flyer. Again, some of these relievers are going to be the last spot in your bullpen. Maybe Jordan Romano, if he hits, like he's a guy that can actually be like the D-back closer. Guy like Kyle Finnegan maybe could actually be like a setup man for the D-backs if he gets back to being really good. But a guy like Jacob Webb, probably just one of the last relievers in your pen if he hits for the D-backs. Now I got a few more non-tendered free agents that I want to discuss for the D-backs in segment number 2. But hey, if you ever think about placing a little wager down, because I'm on a little hot streak, hitting my last 3 bets, and guess what? The best place to do that, of course, because the place I'm going to do that is, of course, FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more at FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss some more non-tendered free agents that the D-backs should consider this offseason. The next guy I want to discuss is someone that we actually saw in the NL West this past season, playing for the team that just went to the World Series, Brent Honeywell Jr. Is he the best reliever in baseball? No, he had a decent season with the Dodgers in the regular season. Definitely struggled in the postseason, but he did get a World Series ring, which is all that matters to him. And the numbers in the regular season were pretty solid. For the LA Dodgers, 34 innings pitched, 2.62 ERA. You'll take that. Now, the thing with Brent Honeywell that really, leaves a bad taste in your mouth, when you look at the strikeout numbers for Brent, last year at the Dodgers, 4.5 strikeouts per 9 innings is just criminally low. Like, this is a guy who does not strike out anyone. 6.7% strikeout, or 12.7% strikeout rate. You do like this 6.7% walk rate. That's not too bad. Hard contact numbers, maybe a little bit higher than I would like, but Brent is someone that averages around 95 miles per hour on his fastball, has already played for the LA Dodgers, familiar with the NL West. Is he the best pitcher? No, but if he's the, again, last reliever in the D-backs bullpen, righty, 6'2", big guy that could throw decently hard. Maybe he doesn't get the strikeout numbers and the walk rate's a little high, but he can be a good, effective reliever. I just think if he's the last guy in your bullpen, that's probably the best role for him. But I still think he's someone that is not bad to take a flyer on. Next up, how about a little Tanner Rainey? This is a guy who was also on the Washington Nationals this past year with Kyle Finnegan. He's been on the Nationals for most of his career. Outside of 2018, he's been on the Nationals every year of his career. And Tanner Rainey is someone that is intriguing to me. He's another one of those guys where the question is, what is the health of a Tanner Rainey, and can he give back to the guy he was pre-Tommy John surgery? Because you look at Rainey's strikeout numbers, and this guy was a monster from 2019 to 2022. It was basically like 12, 13 strikeouts per 9 innings. Like, his K rate, if I pull it up right now, was insanely high during that period as well. This was a guy, you look at his strikeout numbers, 42%, 34%, 28%. Like, he was a K machine. Then 2023 underwent Tommy John surgery, or I think at the end of 2022 underwent Tommy John, missed most of 2023, made one appearance in 2023, then came back this season. This was his first full season post Tommy John and was not super effective this past year. 4.76 ERA, 51 innings pitch, a 1.49 whip. So why do I want this guy? The reason is Tanner Rainey, fastball this year, 94 miles per hour. But Tanner Rainey, when he was at his best, his fastball averaged 97 miles per hour. And last year in 2023, in the one outing he had, his fastball averaged 96. And so the question for me is, now that he has a second year removed from Tommy John, he's still a guy that isn't super old, only 32 years of age. Can he add another tick of that velo? Can he get back to the guy that's sitting around 96, 97, as opposed to the guy that was sitting more 94, 95? Because The guy pre-2023 was a K machine, threw super hard, and was a very effective reliever. The guy that we saw this past season was not as effective. And so I want to know if he can get back to the guy that we saw pre-Tommy John or if the guy that we see post-Tommy John. It's just where Tanner Rainey is in his career. That's why I think he's a very, very interesting flyer for the D-backs to consider. Then these last couple guys, I got a little bit more wild with it. These next two guys aren't relievers. They're position players who I think could be interesting cases to make on this D-back squad, because the first guy I want to discuss, Brendan Rodgers. Is there really a position where he fits on this D-back squad currently? No, unless you're telling me he's going to be like the new DH for the D-backs, or maybe tell me he starts playing a little first base. That's really the only way he makes sense. Maybe he plays a little corner outfielder, but Brendan Rodgers, if we do bring him in as a super utility DH guy, I do think he's interesting. I do wonder if he can play a little first base, or maybe can like a Eugenio Suarez play first base? Maybe that's a little too crazy, but Brendan Rodgers, third pick in the draft, a guy who's been one of the top prospects in baseball every year and just never hit his ceiling, mostly due to injuries. But I do think he's a guy who's solid. I don't think Brendan Rodgers is bad. And so if we can get him in the building, I do think there's a world where Brendan Rodgers could still be a very good Major League Baseball player. Maybe not the guy who was the number 3 pick in the draft, but I could see Brendan Rodgers turning into a little Draxon Profar, where all of a sudden it's like, whoa, is Brendan Rodgers going to make the all-star team this year? Like, I do think Brendan Rodgers has enough talent in his tool bag where he can have a season where it's like, oh my God, Rodgers is finally realizing his potential. I still think he's a solid defensive player as well. He's got a little pop in his bat, maybe not a ton of pop, but he's got a little pop, and he does crush left-handed pitching. So at the very least, Brendan Rodgers could be a platoon guy for the Arizona Diamondbacks. So I would definitely consider Rodgers. The fact that he's also been in the NL West for his entire career, I think is also appealing, because he knows all these opponents that the D-backs would have to go against. So I would also like to consider Brendan Rodgers, despite him not actually being like the perfect fit for the D-backs. I just think it'd be super exciting to bring a guy who's still young and a guy who was considered one of the most talented prospects in baseball. Maybe it does block Jordan Lawler for a year, but if you don't expect Jordan Lawler to still be a main dude for the D-backs in 2025, then why not take a one-year flyer on a Brendan Rodgers? Then the final guy I want to discuss, Austin Hayes. He was very disappointing this year for the Orioles and Phillies. After coming off a season 2023 where he was an all-star, he's been pretty solid from 21 to 23. Not an elite player. He's got some decent pop, not great pop, but the bat has always been solid. The defense has always been solid. And if you're just talking about like that Randall Grichuk level player, like Austin Hayes could probably come in and fill in that Grichuk production. Grichuk was very, very good last year, so maybe not to that level, but considering where Grichuk was prior to 2024, how we viewed Grichuk, I think Austin Hayes would kind of fill that same void of how I felt about Grichuk entering 2024, because I mean, after the season, I feel like Grichuk is a premier outfielder in baseball, but entering the season, I was like, yeah, he's a 4th, 5th outfielder on my team. Like, I don't really think too much about him. For Austin Hayes, I think it would be very much in the same mold. And so I think he could probably replace Grichuk and give us a lot of the production that we expected Grichuk to give us prior to 2024, because of course, post 24, we're like, man, Grichuk just had himself an all-star season. I pray we could just bring back Randall Grichuk this offseason. Now, I want to discuss some free agents to avoid for both the D-backs and other teams this offseason in segment number 3. But hey, I need to talk to you guys about this delicious food I've been eating called Omaha Steaks, because nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off site-wide during their cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with a promo code MLB. With 5 generations of experience, Omaha Steaks consistently delivers the world's best steak experience, and their gifting experts have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code MLB and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. Minimum purchase may apply. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss some free agents that the D-backs and some teams should avoid, because I think there's some players who are going to get overpaid this offseason who I just don't view in the same light as some other guys. And the first guy I'm going to start off with, I feel like has become controversial because the contract that has been reported that this guy is going to get and the way he's viewed around Major League Baseball, it just maybe different of how I view him. I do think he's a very good Major League Baseball player, but this guy might get $300 million. I just don't think he's worth that amount of money. Alex Bregman. Bregman is a very good player. He's a stud defense player. He's got pop. He's a World Series winner. But Bregman at this point is more of an all-star than a superstar. And I think he's going to get paid like a superstar because in 2018, 2019, he was a superstar. This was one of the premier third baseman MVP candidates, putting up 8-9 WAR seasons and was elite. But over the last few years, he's been half that player in terms of WAR. Is he still a good Major League Baseball player? I'm sorry if you guys heard that. My phone rang during the podcast. Of course, my mother has to call me during the podcast. I guarantee you she's going to call me one more time because whenever I don't pick up her call, she just assumes I'm dead. And so she has to blow up my phone. So we'll see if she calls me 8 more times during this podcast. But for Alex Bregman, I just don't think he's going to age that well, considering he's half the player he was 4 years ago, according to WAR. He's still an all-star level player, but he's also a guy who hasn't made an all-star team since 2019. And he's going to get a massive contract, potentially 25 to 30 million a year. I just don't think a guy who's batting 260 with a sub 800 OPS and has basically been that the last 3 years, I don't think that guy should get $300 million. I think he's a lot closer to putting up like Xander Bogaerts level of production over the next few years, as opposed to putting up, Rafael Devers, whoever the elite third baseman infielder, is right now. So for Bregman, I just don't think he's going to live up to whatever contract he gets. I think he's going to be overpaid. And I still think he's a stud, but is he the stud he was back in 2019? Like, people are going to give him like Juan Soto level money. Like if he gets like a Carlos Correa contract, as we've seen with the Correas, as we've seen with the Bogarts, those deals have been terrible. I think Bregman, maybe he's better than those guys right now, but I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to be like a really, really elite baseball player. If he's getting like an 8-9 year deal, I think that's going to come back to bite somebody. Next up, this is a guy who's coming off a monster season, and that's why he makes me nervous. Anthony Santander. He is a guy who the last 3 years, 33 home runs, 28 home runs, 44 home runs, has been a power machine, but also a guy whose all production is basically coming from those home runs because the slugging is monster. 506 this past year, 472 the year prior, but OBP was a 308, the average 235. He is truly home run or bust, and those guys are good for 1 or 2 year deal. But if you're trying to pay Santander like 5 years, 120, if you're trying to give him like JD Martinez money when he went to the Red Sox, I think that's wrong. If you want to give him like a Jock Peterson level deal, like 2 years for $30 million, like I think that would be fine for Santander. It's all about the value and the contract length. If he's getting big money for long term, I think it's bad. If it's short term money like Jock Peterson, then I think it's good for Santander because I think he's a outfielder, DH, power bat who is just very much home run or bust, and I don't trust those guys on big time contracts. And so I like Santander, but I think there's definitely a lot of risk with him this offseason. Another guy, Jack Flaherty, I do think is a little risky because we saw he can be so up and down from start to start. And you could just tell immediately when his velocity is good and his movement on his pitches, he looks nasty, but that stuff isn't working. He looks like such a vulnerable and easy pitcher to get hits off of. And so he can go somewhere and he can either be elite like he was with the Tigers this past year, still really good like he was with the Dodgers, or is he going to be the guy that we saw in 2023, 2022, and 2020, where he was not very good, not very effective, still threw a lot of strikes, but the walk rate was insane. The contact rate was insane. Like his whip prior to 24 and 23, it was a 158. And 22 is a 161. And so this guy has given up so much contact before. And I just want to know if he's going to get back to the pitcher that we saw in 23 and 22, where he was just so vulnerable, or is he going to be the guy that we saw in 2024? That's why I think there's just so much risk with Flaherty. I think I would rather stay away. Then finally, the guy I want to discuss, he's one of those guys when you look at the underlying advanced stats, the nerd community loves him. But if you're a casual baseball fan, you're like, this guy has an ERA above 4 every single season, but someone might pay him like a frontline starter this year. Nick Pivetta. I don't know how I feel about Nick Pivetta. I feel like he is a good pitcher. Double-digit strikeouts per 9 the last couple of years. Again, the underlying numbers tell you Nick Pivetta is a good pitcher when you look at like expected ERA and Sierra and all that. But also, if you just look at the traditional stats, he's never had an ERA below 4 the last 4 years when he's been projected to be a breakout pitcher every single season. And so because guys are going to look at the advanced numbers and say, Pavetta's, this is the year he's going to be a breakout pitcher, maybe the numbers tell you he is who we think he is, and he is a good pitcher, but he's not a great pitcher. He's a number 3, a number 4 in a rotation. He's a guy that's going to be flirting with that 4 ERA, and maybe we should just say the numbers are what the numbers are. And so for Pivetta, he could be a guy that gets overpaid this offseason, and I would not want to see it be by the Arizona Diamondbacks. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news, coverage, and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Dose.